All right, hello. Hello. Oh, boys. It is what day is it today? It is a Thursday. Welcome, boys. Now, today we're going to be doing something different. We're not going to be doing XCOM today. We're going to be talking about how the mind works. Hold on, let me get a lamp really quick. Because the lighting in here is not good enough for me. As you can see, I'm super prepared. Oh, fuck. Actually, I don't have an outlet. Oh, fuck it. Alright, no lamp. Fuck it. Alright, fuck the lighting. Alright. So, as I was saying, what we're going to talk about is how to never fail, right? And what I mean by this specifically is, right, when you go into anything, right, I'm going to use my personal examples because I feel like that's the best way I can talk about it, by using examples, anecdotes. So, for me personally, one of the things I failed at a lot in life was finding a girl, right? And what happened to me is when looking for a girl, I would set up these expectations like, oh, I want to find the perfect girl, right? I'm going to find this girl and she's going to be the one, right? I'm going to be set forever. I'm done, right? And that expectation, right, that pressure I put onto the scenario, right, it didn't actually let me live through the scenario. Instead, if that reality I was living in, that girl, did not meet those expectations, then it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it just would not work out. So that's what I'm talking about when you set an expectation, right? And if you don't meet that expectation, you're doomed to fail, right? And then we're going to talk about all the like little caveats there and whatnot. One of the really important ones, right? I touched on it, self-fulfilling prophecy, but another really important one is the mindset that it gives you, right? Because where do we get expectations from, right? They come from our past experiences, right? Let me scroll down here, show you boys. So expectations, right? They come from past experiences, right? So for me personally, where I got this idea of finding or having a girl, right, happily ever after, that came from, family pressures and whatnot, right? So that was ingrained into me, right? And that was the expectation I put on the other person, right? And of course it wasn't met. And when that wasn't met, what happened to myself, what I thought was I failed, right? I failed and I didn't succeed. So that's one of the biggest things that happened to me, is that constant failure over and over again of trying to find somebody, but I could never find somebody. So, as I failed, what I learned from my experiences of failing is that when I go into a relationship, I am doomed to fail, right? So if I go in, I already think that I'm going to fail, right? So it's just like a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point, right? Because from my past experiences, every time I tried to have a relationship, it just would not work out. And why is that? Because of the previous expectation I had beforehand, right? Of this is going to be the one, right? And you can apply this to anything in life, right? If you go to a job interview and like, oh, this is my dream job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? You do the job, and then eventually, as you're doing the job, you realize it's not your dream job, right? And then you continue looking for other things. I think that's a little stretch of an example, but I think the premise is still applicable to many areas in life. But I'm going to stick to the girl topic for me, because for me it's a lot easier to talk about a subject when it's focused around something that I don't know how else to say it, but I guess it's more personal for me. Right? Talking about things arbitrary, it's kind of wishy-washy, and it's kind of like, listening to old people talk, like, oh, it's really wisdom, really solid advice, but if I can't apply it to a scenario, then it's kind of like in one ear, out the other, right? So that's why when I talk with individuals, like one-on-one, right, you listen to their story, or at least I listen to their story, right, and then you apply the lessons to their scenario, right? But when you just give wishy-washy lessons, right, you got to apply them for me in order to be interested. So that's where we get past experiences from, right? From the way we're raised, from whatever, right? Life just throws you your parents, how you're raised, the community you're in, your school, teachers, etc., whatever media you are attracted to, right, as you grow up. So that's where past experiences come from, right? And that gives you a expectation of what you're going to expect when you go into a certain scenario, right? And of course, it's pretty helpful. Like, let's not like just disregard it like, oh, it's bad, right? Expectations are bad. It's also very helpful, right? Because, you know, this is ingrained into us. Because back in the day, bro, back in the day, fucking lions, bro, you see one of your clans members, you're like a fucking tribes person doing hunter-gatherer shit. You see one of your clans people get eaten. What are you gonna do, bro? You're gonna learn from that experience because you don't want to die, right? So when you see an experience happen, right, it came from the past, you saw somebody die in the past, and then when you encounter a tiger in the future, right, you're fucking aware, not the, you know, fuck with it, right? Run away from it or whatever. So it's definitely a helpful trait that we have developed as humans. So failing, right? You fail, right? From my personal experience, go into a relationship. Oh, she's going to be the one, live happily ever after, etc., etc. When that doesn't happen, I fail, right? And then that gives me experience that I carry into my future relationships. And then what happens then, right? Same thing happens over and over again because that expectation, right? And that carried weight from not having the expectation filled causes me to fail over and over and over again. Right? And then let's continue on from here. So what do we do about that? Or at least what did I do about that in my life, right? For me, it wasn't, you know, waking up one day and like realizing, et cetera, et cetera. This was like a long, prolonged journey for me figuring out how to understand myself, understand my mind, and how to work around it, right? So I began to let go of expectations, right? This was the biggest, most important part, right? I had to realize that I wasn't even aware that when I was going into a relationship, I had these expectations, right? I literally was not aware of it. It was kind of like, I don't know how else to say it. I just don't know. Like, I just was not aware of what preconceived expectation I had, right? From the life I lived, from whatever, right? But as I began to gain more self-awareness through this long journey, right? I began to look at different aspects of my life and realize like, oh, when I go into this situation, I can feel, right? I can see myself having this like image of what I want from the situation, right? Like, let's say I go gamble $100. Oh, I want to win, right? I want to get 200. I want to double up, right? That's my expectation, right? And once I become self-aware of that, right? And then I can almost give myself distance, because once I'm aware of it, once I can recognize it, then I can give myself distance from that expectation, right? And then just live in whatever the reality is, right? So that's where I learned to date, I guess you could say. Learn how to date, for me, is opposite sex, right? Females. For you, it might be same sex, whatever, it doesn't matter, but I still think it's applicable, right? Because if any relationship, right, you have expectations, you go in, if they're not met, you know, there could be a whole lot of problems there. All right, so for me, it was setting no expectations. That's how I really did it. Once I realized that once I go into a scenario, and I don't have any of this weight carried with me, I'm like, oh, I want this to happen. I want that to happen. Oh, these fantasies, these dreams, whatever, right? When I was able to just accept whatever came from that scenario, I was able to be a lot more happier. And this is where the failing part comes in, right? Because if I go in with an expectation and is not met, I fail. But if I go in with no expectation, what happens then? Whatever happens, you could look at it in a positive light or a negative light. Now, this is like a little bit on a tangent as well, right? If you want to be like a glass half full or glass half empty kind of person, right? That's up to you, right? But for me, I like to look at it as a glass half full, right? Because I feel like that positive perspective has helped me a lot more than the negative perspective, because I've drank from both glasses, one that's half empty and one that's half full. And for me, the water tastes a lot better. The water tastes a lot better when the glass is half full, let me tell you, all right? Shit, let me have a drink. So, going in with no expectations. Actually, let's move down a little bit. All right, going into a scenario with no expectations. So if we go into a scenario with no expectations, you know, we just kind of have to accept whatever happens. Or rather, no, let me, fuck it, whatever. Accept whatever happens. And then you got to work from there, right? Because once you're not failing, right? That's when you're not like digging yourself into a deeper hole, right? Because once you start failing, that's when the real juice starts to happen. So let me see, what else did I write here? Going into the scenario, no expectation, accept whatever happens. And then work from there. Now, once again, this is very arbitrary, right? These words I'm writing down, quite arbitrary, even for me. So I'm going to try and give myself a little more examples here. So let's use a different example this time. Let's go with, let me look at chat. Are there any examples in chat? Overconfidence is a slow and insidious killer. Good. Good to see some memes flowing in chat. Production value. Yes, very good production value. Yes, this is not XCOM solo list. Is that the first live mental session? Yes, you could say so, Cornelius. Could say so. Okay. I gotta refocus my mind here because I'm getting a little sidetracked. So go, blah, blah, blah. Where did we go from? So, how to never fail by setting expectations. So, we don't want to fail because what does failing do? Let me fill this out a little more. So, failing gives us negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement leads to, what is it? So, the more we fail, the harder, okay, it doesn't lead to, harder to try again and potentially succeed. So that's another big thing, right? Because if you fail, right, you feel negative, blah, blah, blah. That's one of the caveats I was talking about earlier, right? Then it becomes harder to try again because if you fail, right, you don't want to feel that negative emotion again. So it's easier to just not try than to try and fail. So if you set your expectations very low, or in my case, right, I do no expectations, right? But I feel like no expectations, you know, that's not for everybody. For some people, it might be low expectations. So let's do no/low expectations. This doesn't apply then. Work from there, I guess it's both. So if you set a low expectation, right, and you succeed at whatever the expectation is, what happens to your brain then, right? You're no longer in this rut of failing, right? Because when you fail something, you don't want to do it again because you had a negative experience. But if you set a low expectation or no expectation and you just experience whatever the experience is, then you don't have that weight of failure weighing on you, right? And then you can kind of judge the scenario a little bit better, a little more clear-headed, right? So, and if it's a low expectation and you fulfill it, right? Because sometimes you might not fulfill it, right? And then you can get into the failing thing again. But if you do fulfill it and you succeed, that's going to build a positive reinforcement, right? And then you're going to be able to repeat whatever you want to do again, right? Or, even better, right? This is why some people say, like, make your bed early in the morning, because you set the expectation low, right? You do something very easy, very simple, right? And you build that success, right? It's like a little snowball, right? You get that snowball rolling, right? And then you do little thing after little thing after little thing. It's all those steps, right? That lead to something big and grandiose, like whatever. Could be finding a job, could be finding a girl, finding a guy, getting your dream job, whatever. So I think that's getting the snowball rolling. Getting the snowball rolling by setting, by, no, not by, what is it called? By accomplishing, no. What's a good way to write this? Getting the snowball rolling. Fuck it, we'll just leave it at that. Getting the snowball rolling. So, also another thing that might happen is when you set a, so the same thing could happen, right? You set low expectations, right? And what happens if you aren't even able to meet those low expectations, right? Then you're going to feel even worse, right? Because before, if the expectation is really high and you're not able to do it, then you're like, ah, fuck it, I set the expectation too high, whatever, right? But if you set the expectation low and you aren't able to do it, then what the fuck happens? Right? The expectation was so low and I'm too lazy of a motherfucker to even do the low expectation activity. Right? So this is where you have to be very, very careful with the mind, because then you're going to fall into that same loop again, right? Where you get negative reinforcement because, boom, you're not able to do it because, you know, X, Y, whatever reason, right? You're too lazy, etc., etc. Or there could be a real reason, right? There could be like, oh, you know, hospital or, you know, emergency or etc., whatever, right? But you could still fall into this, loop of failing and then not even be able to do it. And it's even more, not dangerous, but more potent when the expectation is low. Because when the expectation is low, right, and you're not even able to succeed on that, then you're kind of like, well, fuck, I'm a lazy motherfucker or whatever, right? You can fall into that loop. I definitely was in that loop as well. So that's where you got to be self-aware of, build self-awareness, awareness of your own expectations. Right, and what does this look like, right? Because when we set an expectation, it's almost like another level to it, kind of like Inception, but with expectation. Wait, how do I? Inception, expectation. I want to do like Inception with expectation and merge those two words together. Inception. No, this is retarded. I'm probably gonna cut this out. Inception / no, fuck it. All right. So what I'm trying to say is have expectations on your expectations, right? And this is where you can do no expectations or low expectations on your expectations. So let's go into a scenario here, right? Let's so a good scenario here would be, like, I'm going to use the dating thing again because I feel like it's very close to me. Let's say you're going on a date, right? And you go in with no expectations or low expectations. So for me, right, I would go on a date, right? And then I would have expectations. Oh, is she the one, right? Is she going to be the one I'm ever after? Or, you know what I'm saying? The one, you know, the one, right? Those are my expectations when I go into the date, right? So let's say I'm able to finally learn to have or to set low expectations or no expectations at all, right? And then what happens is if I'm not able to fulfill those, right, I could fall into this pattern of negative reinforcement. So building self-awareness of my own expectations is when I can set an expectation on having no expectations, right? And what that means is like you are almost self-aware enough to realize that you have set your expectation to be low or none, but you might not be able to actually follow through with that. Right? Because sometimes life, you know, you get caught up in the moment or whatever, right? There's so many different facets that can happen, right? In life. Life is truly chaos, right? Not truly, but, you know, whatever. But life is crazy like that, right? Sometimes you set expectations and you're just not able to meet them, right? And then that can also lead to the fucking negative reinforcement thing, right? Because you can't even meet your own expectations. Right, and this is where you have to be like self-aware, like, hey, sometimes I don't even meet my own expectations, right? I set low expectations, but I just have it hard, like, it's like wiring in your brain, right? You've been taught to have high expectations your whole life, right? That sometimes even though you're aware that you should set low expectations so you don't fall into this rut, right? You have to also be aware that sometimes like your wiring in your brain pushes you the opposite way. Right, so if you have that self-awareness and you're able to realize that sometimes you do that despite knowing that you shouldn't, right? Have compassion for yourself, right? Realize that you're not perfect and you're going to make mistakes. That's what I mean by setting expectations on your expectations. Realize that even though you set a goal, you may not be able to achieve it. And that's okay, right? That's part of the process, right? And that's where you got to have that self-compassion because that's truly how you grow. Right, because if you start being your worst bully, right, you're your worst enemy, right, you're your biggest bully, right. If you're mentally like fucking yourself, like, oh, why couldn't I do this? Fuck, I'm such a whatever, right. And then you use, for me, it was video games, right. I would use video games to escape my own negative thoughts, right, and then I wouldn't have to deal with them, right. Of course, there's drugs, there's all sorts of things, right, that can help you escape your own mind. For me, what I do now is more meditating. Meditating is a lot more helpful for me. Video games does the same thing though, right? It gives me a distraction from my mind, But as I've become more aware of my own mind, right, I've not had to resort to those kind of distractions that take me away from my mind. Because honestly, being with myself, meditating and being with my mind, I learned how to gain that distance from my mind without having to use an external source. Whether that be drugs, you know, girl, whatever distraction you may use. It's different for everybody. And for me, one of the biggest ones growing up was video games, right? And building that self-compassion, that process of understanding that you will fail, right? But if you set low expectations, or have no expectations in my case, how can you ever fail if you never have a goal to meet? Now, there is a downside to this, right? So if you set no expectations, what's stopping you if you set no expectations? Will you have a purpose, motive? How the fuck do you spell motive? Motive. It's just an E. It's just an E, boys. It's just an E. A purpose, motive to do anything in life. Right? Because this can also be a little nuanced thing as well, right? Where if you have no expectations, right, you're just kind of living life, you're kind of cruising, you know, you're on, what's the thing in cars where you're driving, right, it does the speed automatically? Cruise control, right? That's what it's called. Cruise control. Yeah, if you have no expectations, it's almost like you have, for me, sometimes it can be like, you're just kind of willy-nilly, you know, you're on the wave, right? Life is taking you wherever, and you're kind of just along for the ride, right? And you can almost gain a sense of purposeless, or sense of like, having no purpose, right? Like, what are you doing? If you have no goal, you have nothing to strive towards, right? And that can definitely be one of the downsides of setting no expectations, right? So there's also that caveat that I want to mention, and that's something I had to experience myself, because I went down the path of having no expectations, and one of the things I realized when I went down that path is that I felt like I had no direction, no goal, no purpose in life. Right? But eventually I did find a purpose, right? And that's doing mental health stuff, right? And that's what I'm doing now. So even though that I was able to set no expectations, I still can move in the direction I want to move without having my mind become, you know, have this failing mindset where I have this goal, I want to do mental health stuff, right? But I'm not able to meet my own envisionment, is that even a word? My own fucking, what do you call it? I'm just going to say envisionment, fuck it, right? My own vision of what I want to create. If I'm not able to meet it, then I'm failing, right? And that was one of my biggest, probably not my biggest, but one of the bigger struggles I had to go through when, you know, trying to do this stuff, right? And you can apply this to anything in life. For me, it's mental health. For you, it could be business, you know, cooking, you know, starting your own shop, whatever the fuck it may be, right? Because if I'm not able to do it perfectly, right, to what my image is, then I fail, and then I fall into this rut, and then I'm not making progress, right? But when I go in with no expectations, like what I'm doing right now, boys, right now is the perfect example, right? I just said I'm going live today at 7 p.m., and I'm going to talk about how to never fail. I don't know if you can read that, but I wrote it on a little post note. How to never fail by setting expectations. I had no fucking clue what I was going to do today, boys. I had no fucking clue. But here we are, right? I'm doing something. Even though it may not be what I envisioned to be perfect, right? Because with a girl, right? Oh, happily ever after. Oh, I want to do this mental health stuff. Oh, I want to be set for life. I don't want to have to work again. Don't worry about money, right? But that may not happen, right? That was an expectation I carried with me as I went into this goal of mine. And when I didn't succeed in that, I fell into that negative reinforcement schedule, and then I would stop trying, right? I would distract myself with video games, whatever, right? Just not focus on the thing. But here I am doing it with no expectation of what's going to come from it. But I'm just fucking doing it. So that's where I'm going to leave it, right? If you guys got any questions, feel free to ask. Anything you want me to clarify, I can clarify. If you guys want to share your own experiences, I'm here to read. All right. Is this Rectful stream? Oh, bro. Rectful. Bro, I remember I tuned in Wreckful. He was playing Hearthstone. That's when I got first introduced to him. Hearthstone was the shit back in the day, bro. You get mad at yourself for not setting the expectation low enough, Kappa? That's okay, interesting. I don't know if I should take that comment serious or not because of the Kappa, but I'll just leave it at that. All right. By choosing small, easily obtainable task. Yes. If you choose small, easy obtainable task, right, that's when you get the snowball rolling, right? But even if you're not able to do the small obtainable task, like sometimes I don't make my bed in the morning, boys. Sometimes I don't make it in the morning, and that's fine as well, right? But, right, you get the snowball rolling. Do whatever you think will get the snowball rolling, right? And this is where you gotta like spend time with yourself, right? Because you can do all the research you want, like, oh, top 10 tricks to fucking get your life together or whatever, right? Oh, what do, you know, the billionaires do in the world? What do super athletes do in the world to be successful? What do successful people do to be successful, etc., right? But at the end of the day, right, everybody is their own unique individual, right? Nobody has gone through the same experiences as you in life, right? There's a lot of similarities, right? People can go through breakups, right? They can share that experience and whatnot. There's a lot of similarities, but your own journey through life, from the day you were born to where you are now, nobody else has lived the same life as you, right? So that makes you unique, right? And the same goes with those successful people. What works for them, what they do to get the snowball rolling is unique and works for them themselves. So when they share their tips or tricks or whatever with other people, it may work for them, but it's not a catch-all for everybody, right? Because sometimes, there's so many examples to pick from that my mind is kind of like lost here and I don't know what to pick. But not everything is going to work for you, right? And that's where you got to spend time with yourself and understand yourself before you can fix yourself, right? Because if you want to fix yourself, there's also the concept there of, do you even need to be fixed, right? And that's like a whole nother can of worms to open up. But if you want to improve on yourself, right? Improve on yourself, understand yourself, right? Understand what you want to do to get the snowball rolling, right? And don't try to copy other people, right? Because sure, there might be similarities, right? Like, oh, you go through a breakup, how do you get over a breakup, right? You can find similarities there, and sometimes they will work, but it's not a catch-all, right? Do the research, right? Get more information, understand that information, and see, and maybe apply it, right? Apply it and see if it works, because who fucking knows? It might work, right? But it's up to you to at least try, right? And if you try with the expectation that it's going to work and it doesn't work, well, fuck. Then you get back into this negative loop, right? But if you go in with no expectations, like, oh, fuck, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But you go in with no expectations, and then you just see what happens, right? You work from there, right? You see what happens when you go into there, and you work from what happens, right? Maybe it did work. Maybe it didn't. And if it didn't, well, nothing to lose, right? Because you had no expectation of it working. Therefore, you don't build up any negative reinforcement, right? And then maybe you can try something else, and maybe that will work. Did you find the experience of letting go of expectations disorientating? Like there is no longer a baseline to know where you are at? Yes. Yes, it can be very disorientating, yes. That's a good comment, Wangstra. So, if you have... Right, because experiences, like we said, all the way, or I said, rather, not we. I just have it in my vocabulary to say it we now. But come from past experiences, right? So the way you're literally raised by your parents, by everything, right? Having to let go of your past, right? It can be very disorientating because then who are you? What are you? Right? If you let go of everything you've learned in life, like all your morals, all your principles, everything you value in life, that all came from your past experience in life and how you were raised. And letting go of that, like just gone, who the fuck are you then? And that can be very jarring and disorientating, right? But I think that's part of the, at least for me, that was part of my, I think I had the most experience with that with meditating, because sometimes I would meditate for a very long time, and then letting go of everything and just kind of existing, right? Just existing in the moment, just feeling, I usually did it by the river. There's a river down by my place. I just go there and I would just meditate, Right? It's like a park and whatnot. I would just meditate there for like half an hour sometimes, and just exist. Right? And letting go of everything. Like I would hear, I would hear shit, right? Because there's other people in the park. Like things would happen out here, baby crying, and usually my like instinct, right, is to react, right? Like, oh, there's a baby crying. I want to go look in the direction and see what's happening, and make sure everything's okay. But when I was in that zone, that meditative zone, I just had that information come into my ear, right? And then I was aware that my reaction was to do something, right? To react, to look in the direction of whatever happened, the stimulus that happened, right? But I was able to like separate myself from that in the meditative state and not react to the way I was conditioned, right? And as I practiced that skill more and more by meditating, right, it gave me more and more distance away from the way I was, raised, I guess that's to say. But yeah, it can be very disorientating, extra. After 5 minutes of meditating, I start losing it. Yeah, I believe. Well, I'm not a medical doctor, right? All right, I'm just a dude. So everything I say shouldn't be taken as medical advice or whatever Dr. K says. I use that same disclaimer here. Copy and paste it onto my stream. But yeah, meditation can have if you have like psychosis or whatever, schizophrenia, like there's definitely downsides to it. But for most people, it should be fine. But there are fringe cases where, depending on the way your brain is wired, right, you might not be able to sit with yourself, right, sit and meditate. It also depends on what you mean by meditating, right? Because in the sense I'm talking about, I'm just talking about like having your mind be blank, right? But the way I was able to achieve that is by doing like the traditional, I guess you could say, hippie stuff, where there we go with me setting an expectation, right? From my past experiences, right? But like going into that like trance state, right? Where I just sit there and focus on nothing, right? And that can be very difficult. But for me, it was good, right? Because I needed a break from my mind, right? Because before I would use, drugs, fucking video games, whatever. I had an addictive personality, and I had an addictive personality because I wanted to escape from my mind, right? So instead, I got addicted to meditating, right? And I began to realize, right, as I meditated, right, I got distance. I was able to, it's almost like exercising, right? But with the mind, right? You exercise enough, you build enough strength with your mind or your muscles that eventually you just have like this innate strength with you, right? You can walk around, you can pick up something heavy and you can put it down, right? You work out every now and then, but you just have like a bulky body, right? Same with the mind, right? If you work out the mind enough, right, you're going to build up that muscle in your brain, I guess you could say. You're going to build up that repetition, that skill in your brain, and then it's going to almost become easier to gain distance away from whatever my mind is battling myself with, right? Because before, right, shit happens, I do video games, get away from the problem. That was my solution to my own mind, right? Now that I've meditated, I've done enough mental push-ups that now when I want to take a step away from my mind, I can just do it like that, right? I can just, boom, done, right? I'm having negative thoughts. I have enough self-awareness to catch myself and then just let it go, right? And then I can just exist, right? Because I've done so many repetitions of this mental practice of focusing on my breath that I just have that like innate muscle memory in my brain now. So I can just give myself distance away from my own problems I create in my head. So, I don't know if that answered your question, player 2, but hopefully it did. All right. Well, it looks like that's everything in chat. So, until next time, boys. Catch you on the flip side. Hey.